My name is Heather McKay, and I'm an occupational therapist and dementia care specialist. On behalf of ComForCare and At Your Side Home Care, I'd like to thank you for listening and learning about frontotemporal dementia. We can call it FTD for short. As you gather information about FTD and find ways to apply it in your own life, I hope you'll share your knowledge and experience with friends, neighbors, family members, or colleagues at your work. In our short time together, I'll share some information and tips that I've collected along the way in my own experience working in home health, hospice, community-based practice, dementia care education, and caring for a beloved family member of my own. These are some things that I think every person needs to know about FTD. Whether you're thinking about your own brain or supporting people you know living with the disease. So help me spread the word. Here's what I'll share with you today. I want to look at some of the science behind FTD. Also want to look at some hallmarks of the condition, like what to look for and what makes FTD distinct from all the other types of dementia. We'll examine the journey of FTD, in other words, how it progresses over time. And I'll share some helpful home care strategies that have worked for families and professionals to create better days that are just more meaningful, safe, and pleasant for people living with FTD and their caregivers. Now keep in mind, helpful strategies do include things to try and things to avoid. Imagine you're sitting at the kitchen table with a friend, talking about dementia caregiving. After all, 16 million Americans are helping a friend or family member living with dementia. In fact, the majority of dementia care is done unpaid by those families and friends. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if your friend asked this question, what's the difference between dementia and FTD and Alzheimer's disease? It's a common question, and I answer it in presentations, consultations, and these kitchen table talks every week. Let me share with you the quick explanation that I use that really gets heads nodding. Dementia is an umbrella term. Now, my hands automatically go up when I explain that. It just means that dementia is a category of diseases. With dementia written way up high, there are many different types of dementia underneath that umbrella. But here's what really gets heads nodding. When I say dementia is a word like cancer, most people understand that cancer is an umbrella term. Whether they say it like that or not, they get that cancer is the word written way up high. It's the category because there are many different types of cancer underneath the umbrella. Most people know, skin cancer, lung cancer, breast cancer, colon cancer. The list goes on. They also know that skin cancer is different from lung cancer, but they're both cancer. Now, that's the way the dementia vocabulary works too. With dementia written way up high, underneath that umbrella we have Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, frontotemporal lobe dementia, Lewy body dementia, and the list goes on. FTD is different from all the rest, but they're all dementia. Now, don't be surprised if your friend at the kitchen table says, "Thank you. You're the first person to explain the words in a way that's easy to understand and remember." Well, now you can zero in on that specific type, FTD, and share some more information with your friends. Now, people often ask me, Heather, how does this disease work? If we look at some science behind FTD, we have to start in the brain. FTD is caused by progressive nerve cell damage in the brain regions mainly responsible for behavior, personality, and language. The cell damage is caused by varying proteins that collect in the frontal lobe. That's right behind your forehead, the front of your brain, and the temporal lobe. That's the side of your brain. People with FTD may exhibit extreme changes in behavior with no control over these actions. Today, many conditions are grouped under that category of FTD. So It's almost like a little mini umbrella itself. All of these conditions that qualify as FTD cause personality changes, communication deficits, memory loss, and gradual loss of independence. Just like all the other types of dementia, FTD is progressive with no cure yet. As the disease progresses, the person will need help in every aspect of their life as their brain changes. In the absence of a cure, though, millions of Americans, healthcare providers and family members too, will focus their treatment on maximizing the person's skills and abilities in every stage and enhancing quality of life for the person living with dementia and the caregivers. Let's name a few of those hallmark signs or characteristics of FTD. Your friend at the kitchen table may be wondering how to recognize FTD. Well, first, people with FTD are diagnosed typically between the age of 40 and 60. So that's a little different from other types of dementia. Behavior changes are often the first noticeable sign in FTD. Problems with speech, especially producing words that make sense, understanding the speech of others, or reading, those are all characteristic signs of FTD. FTD eventually affects memory in addition to all these behavioral and language changes. Now, there are different subtypes of FTD. Each subtype progresses differently. Over time, these subtypes of FTD just predispose an individual to physical complications like pneumonia, infection, and fall-related injuries. An average life expectancy for a person with FTD is 7 to 13 years after symptoms start. And most with FTD will pass away because of physical changes that cause skin, urinary tract changes, or lung infections. Let's look at the subtypes a little more closely because each one has some unique symptoms. Behavioral variant of frontotemporal dementia is the first common type. With decline in complex thinking, personality, and behavior, a person loses that judgment and empathy and foresight. All of these thinking skills are some of the first signs. There may be loss of interest or drive or empathy. Changes in eating habits, like binge eating, and changes in executive function, like trouble planning, organizing, and coming up or generating ideas. These are all compromised in the behavioral variant of FTD. It occurs most often in people in their 50s and 60s, but it could develop earlier or later. A second subtype is a primary progressive aphasia, or PPA. You might read it like that. It's the second major type of FTD that affects language skills, speaking, writing, and comprehension, first and foremost. PPA, primary progressive aphasia, normally appears in midlife before the age of 65, but could also develop later. Memory and judgment are affected less in the early stage of PPA, but frustration and depression are both common. A third subtype, ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. It's another disorder in this category of FTD. It produces changes in muscle or motor function, with or without those behavioral symptoms or language problems. ALS causes muscle weakness and wasting. Another subtype, corticobasal syndrome. This one causes arms and legs to become uncoordinated or stiff, in addition to those cognitive and behavioral changes typical of other subtypes. Next, a progressive supranuclear palsy, or PSP, causes muscle stiffness, difficulty walking, changes in posture, problems with eye movements, problems with speech and swallowing. And some people also experience changes in behavior, Because its initial symptoms can resemble other conditions like Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease, diagnosing these different types of FTD can be tricky. Now, I'm thinking of you and your friend at that kitchen table, and you're probably wondering, Heather, where's the good news? Well, the good news is this. Over years of research, people with dementia, families, and professional caregivers of all stripes have discovered effective strategies to improve life for the person living with the disease and their caregivers. Many of the most effective home care strategies don't involve a medicine. After all, there's no magic pill for dementia. So we call these non-pharmacologic approaches. For example, just seeing the world from the perspective of those with FTD helps us create days that are more meaningful, safe, and pleasant for everybody. While days can be long, working with someone's remaining strengths, adjusting our own expectations, and modifying the environment can help us create better days together. If you're caring for someone with dementia, consider these strategies. First, it's helpful to frequent places where the person with FTD can be themselves. Remember, the behavioral symptoms of FTD are not the person's fault. They're doing the best they can. Places that feel comfortable to the person and their caregiver quickly become the favorites. Next, it's helpful to break down tasks into doable steps. One of the most common mistakes that I see is when caregivers give too much information. I'm thinking about a caregiver who arrived to take her mom to an appointment. She greeted her mom, in the living room, and proceeded to spill the whole day's agenda. She's like, "Hey, Mom, how you doing?" Mom said, "Good." She said, "Oh, good. I'm glad you got your shoes on. It's raining outside. I got the car pulled around front. We'll take your walker just in case we have to park far from the door. But once we get to the doctor's office, they'll have a wheelchair in case we need to go to another part of the building. Are you ready to go?" I mean, you can imagine. That went right over her mom's head, and guess what Mom said? "No, I'm not going anywhere." Well, it may seem unnatural at first to hold back some of that information, but breaking the task down into doable steps and putting those steps together may be the easiest way of getting out the door. Another strategy for creating better days is to follow a daily routine, but be ready to flex. Here's what I mean. Have you ever heard a caregiver say, "We need to accomplish the work at our house in the morning because after lunch, my husband likes to rest for a couple of hours, read the paper, watch the news, help me with dinner, and we dine with the early birds." Now that's a couple who's figured out what works for them. And the predictable daily routine makes life easier for them both. When something unusual pops up, like an unpredictable chore in the afternoon or some evening outing that's a special occasion, the caregiver knows that the man with dementia will find it difficult, so she allows for a little more time and anticipates that he'll need more help. That's the key. Build in the routine and lean on it when possible. But caregivers, be ready to flex because people with dementia just aren't as flexible as they once were. Since FTD comes with a lot of this impulsive behavior, it's smart to secure potentially dangerous items. I've met people with FTD who have insatiable appetites, and caregivers would say, "He doesn't know when to say when." Think about eating a whole box of cookies or just minutes, or gulping a whole jar of peanut butter with a spoon. Ouch. So it can be helpful to keep healthy foods and snacks and drinks available and limit portions when you can. Leverage the person's preserved skills in familiar activities. After all, it's still a use it or lose it proposition. And favorite activities can be a great and healthy distraction. Give medications as prescribed, especially since the person's judgment for when and how much is failing them. Pair your verbal instructions with a visual aid to provide cues. The person with FTD may understand your visual cues better than long explanations. Try listening to some favorite music. Areas of the brain that understand music are preserved longer for people with dementia, and music taps emotional memory, rhythmic movement, and even helps you put one foot in front of the other. Encourage exercise, such as just getting out and going for a walk if possible. Music will help. Provide supervision for safety. Communicate with empathy. Here's what I mean. It means focusing more on the feelings and less on the facts. A person with dementia can tell if you care about their problem or if you're sweeping it under the rug because they can hear it in your tone of voice and see it in your body language. So take a deep breath, listen to their concern, and use empathetic words to point out their feelings. Here's an example. It sounds like you're missing your husband. Or, I can tell you're looking for something. Or, it seems like you're at the end of your rope. Once you've made that emotional connection and the person's listening to you, then you can redirect their attention by changing the subject. Changing locations and changing activities can also help shift the person's attention to something less upsetting. Now, redirection and distraction are proven effective strategies for managing challenging behavioral symptoms of dementia, but it takes practice. So don't give up. If your redirection doesn't work, just pause, listen some more, and try to make that emotional connection before you change the subject. Because FTD impacts impulse control, reasoning, judgment, behavior, communication, and memory, avoiding some things can mean better days for the person and their caregivers. For instance, try to avoid arguing. Caregivers, have you heard this phrase? You can be right or you can be happy. It means letting go of some things for the sake of keeping the peace. And I know it's hard to do sometimes, especially with our closest loved ones. I've always said if you can't argue with your spouse, who can you argue with? But I know that if my spouse could no longer reason the way he or she used to, then our arguments over the facts would just end in a stalemate. Have you ever felt the person with dementia pushing you into an argument? They're upset about something that you know to be untrue, so you push back. Have you noticed that as long as you're willing to push, they can push too? Well, that, my friends, is a stalemate, and it has more to do with the feeling of needing to be heard and wanting to be right. In this situation, there's only one person who can stop pushing. It's the person with a healthy brain. Caregivers, when you find yourself in a stalemate, and we'll all get there eventually, my best advice is simple. Take a deep breath and stop pushing. Correcting or scolding the person with FTD, especially over all that behavior stuff, can easily lead to an argument, but we're not all that different. I mean, who actually likes to be made to feel stupid? None of us like that. So, practice some alternative approaches that don't say to the person you're wrong. You might say, try this, and show the person a better way, or ask the person for their help and show them the correct first step. It all feels better than saying, that's not right. Avoid startling the person. After all, when understanding the situation is difficult for the person with FTD, they can seem on edge or easily startled. Everything will be easier for you both if you can avoid scaring the pants off the person in the beginning of your interaction. So practice approaching the person from the front. Let them see you before you're in their personal space. Just offer your hand to greet the person or show your open arms to invite their hug. It's a more comfortable and safer way of beginning the interaction than swooping in from the side or from behind. Given the nature of FTD, it's best to appoint someone else the money manager. If the person has always been financially independent and handled all of those decisions and tasks himself or herself, it may be important to that person to participate with a helper, but it's not wise to assign someone with FTD full responsibility for money management. Don't expect the person to do all they used to do, or at least the way they used to do it. Shifting your own expectations can go a long way towards settling into a new normal. And finally, don't expect to do everything yourself. Caregiving is a team sport, so find your teammates. A final take-home message for today. The ComForCare team is ready and willing to collaborate with you on strategies and solutions for your dementia care needs. People with FTD have unique needs and can continue to live at home with support throughout its progression. Even an extension of 6 to 12 months at home can benefit people with FTD and their families. ComForCare understands the disease's progression and redesigns plans as our clients' needs change to help them live at home as long as possible and get this, to feel at home no matter where they live. Keep in mind, if you'd like more information about something you've learned today, just feel free to contact your local ComForCare office for additional resources, support for family caregivers, and specialized home care for people living with dementia. Thank you.